Prepare to have your health questions answered here on Safe, Effective Natural Solutions with Dr. Todd Binkley, owner of Binkley Healing Center in downtown Ventura. Now, here's Dr. Todd.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Todd Binkley, board-certified doctor of non-force chiropractic and clinical nutritionist. Thanks for tuning in today. We're going to talk about a continuation of 3 in a row now, a series on Alzheimer's and dementia. I got more than the usual number of questions after last week's show and the week before that, but especially after last week's about creatine, how to use it, where to get it, etc. I'm going to talk a little bit more about where to get more information about creatine and its effects on dementia here in a little bit. But before I do that, as always, when I start any discussion about Alzheimer's and dementia, the focus has to be on prevention. And sometimes people get tired of me talking about that because most people want a solution. Well, certainly a lot of people who know, most of us, or many of us at least, probably most of us, tell me if I'm wrong, know someone who has suffered or still is suffering the devastating effects of dementia. And, you know, it's a kind of inevitable for some people, but it is not inevitable for everyone. And the difference between that is often genetic. We're going to talk about the APOE gene again. But for many of us, one of the reasons, the main reason probably that it's so common is because the same process that causes heart disease, one of the number one diseases in America, the number 1 and 2 causes of death are always heart disease and cancer, and they kind of trade places once in a while. But all of the same processes that result in loss of circulation, hardening of the arteries, formation of plaques that can cause heart attacks and strokes, all of these effects on your cardiovascular system, which are mostly preventable, mostly the result of lifestyle, mostly the result of not eating enough good food and too much bad food that causes inflammation, that drives the formation of tears in the lining of your vessels that then start the process of plaque formation. That inflammatory diet and stressful lifestyles causes and at least dramatically accelerates the progress of cardiovascular disease. All those same processes dramatically increase your risk of dementia. The same process that causes a lack of circulation and little clots to form and blockages of microvessels in the brain causes loss of brain tissue, which causes ultimately the symptoms, memory loss and other symptoms of dementia. So prevention is key. And here's a really interesting study that just came out in May of 2025 to bring that home. The title is Risk Factors for Alzheimer's Disease and Cognitive Function Before Middle Age in a United States representative population. So this is published in Lancet Regional Health. This is kind of an American version of the British Journal. So Lancet Regional Health America is May 2025 study on young Americans published in a British journal. Key factors for Alzheimer's are linked to cognitive function as early as ages 24 to 44. So it's a broad range, but the 24 to 44, wow, most people don't notice the symptoms till much later, and if you do, then it's called early onset dementia. So this is really highlighting and bringing home why people need to focus on prevention in the U.S. and elsewhere. So data from this U.S. National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Adult Health, that's the original study that they analyzed. 15,000 participants enrolled in 95. They were enrolled in the years 1994 to 95 when they were in junior high and high school, grades 7 through 12. And then they were followed through 2018. So 15,000 young Americans began this study in 1994 and 95 when they were in 7th grade and then followed through graduation from high school, which was in the year 2018 on average. And again, ages 10 through 18 were followed up at ages 24 through 34, and again from ages 34 to 44. So there was multiple overlapping studies. That's why there's no one starting date and ending date, but they were averaging participants from a number of years and collating the information from that. So the important thing is this is the first study to systematically examine Alzheimer's disease risk factors in a large sample of generally healthy individuals aged 24 to 44 in the U.S., and they targeted this range specifically to identify the earliest associations between known key Alzheimer's disease risk factors and cognitive function patterns before midlife. And so the findings of this study suggest that risk profiles for Alzheimer's emerge long before middle age, revealing early manifestations of cognitive patterns that may predict the decline typically observed in older populations. So what does that mean? The diabetes risk factors included cardiovascular risk factors, amyloid, what they call the ATN biomarkers, which are biomarkers for amyloid, tau proteins, and neurodegeneration. So these are tests that have been around for a while. Under a microscope, damaged brain tissue, when they do an autopsy on people with Alzheimer's, they have consistently shown that people with Alzheimer's have a huge buildup of proteins in the brain that are really scar tissue in the brain. They're the result of a chronic inflammatory process that has gone in overdrive, produced way too much. So it's a normal process, is the point. There's normally amyloid proteins and tau proteins in the brain, but it gets accelerated, and the acceleration of the formation of scar tissue anywhere in the body is almost always the result of some kind of chronic inflammatory process. And that's important because chronic inflammatory processes are largely preventable. You can eat food that is less inflammatory. You can take nutrients that help control inflammation. You can reduce your stress that helps control inflammation long before you end up with a permanent, irreversible degenerative condition, and long before you need to take anti-inflammatory drugs like corticosteroids, etc. So anyway, the risk factors for Alzheimer's disease that they're looking at in this study are cardiovascular risk factors, standard blood tests that measure your cardiovascular risk because they know that is directly associated with your level of disease risk for dementia. And then the amyloid proteins, tau proteins, and other neurodegeneration markers, so these are known as the ATN biomarkers, as well as immune biomarkers, measures of your immune system function. For those of you who want to know more specific details and aren't going to rush out and look up this study online, in addition to age, education, sex, systolic blood pressure, and body mass index, they measured cholesterol, physical activity, the ApoE gene, which we're going to talk about more, and also total tau and neurofilament light, which are the tau and amyloid proteins I mentioned before, high sensitivity CRP, which is a measure of systemic inflammation anywhere in the body, as well as immune system-related interleukins, which are the things that show up in your bloodstream when you have a lot of inflammation happening. So they measured IL-beta, IL-6, IL-8, and IL-10. Those are all interleukins that are associated with inflammatory reactions produced by the immune system, as well as tumor necrosis factor alpha, another one of those markers for inflammation. And they were surprised to find that these were elevated in younger populations. In addition to these biomarkers, home interviewers conducted cognitive assessments among all the participants of things like word recall, delayed word recall, and backward digit span, counting backwards. They were read a 15-word list for word recall and asked to recall as many of the 15 words as possible, and then their cognitive scores were standardized and analyzed to associate with higher memory function. The study goes on to list many, many pages of really specific technical data that is of interest to neurologists with sentences like this. Among adults aged 24 to 34, each 1-point increase in the CAIDE score was associated with a 0.03 standard deviation decrease in the average backward digit span score adjusted for covariates. So if you thought that sounded like dense reading, good, because that's why I'm not going to read any more of that or refer to any more of that. So it's important that they're doing all that because it's specific and detailed and reproducible, and that is the things that they measure when you do studies like these. But the easy way to think about it is that their findings show that Alzheimer's disease risk factors, measurable disease risk factors, which have been known about for a long time, are measurable in early adulthood in the U.S. population over 2 to 4 decades. Earlier than previously thought. The several key risk factors for Alzheimer's disease associated with standard measures of cognition in 24 to 44-year-olds show that these things are already being expressed and measurable with standard tests as early as age 24 and very common, relatively much more common than previously thought in 34 and especially 44-year-olds. So the signs of cognitive decline, the signs of damage to the brain, the signs of measurable loss in function are showing up in U.S. adults in their 30s. That's so important, because it's really, because anyone can do the things that I'm talking about all the time to prevent that, to dramatically reduce your risk of it. Basically, just taking care of your health, eating good food, actually the things you hear about all the time, maybe you get tired of hearing about. This is proving that it will actually work, or dramatically reduce your risk of dementia if you just take care of your health and take care of your heart, exercise, eat good food, reduce stress. And get tested for the things that you can measure, like these cardiovascular risk factors that they measured in these 20 and 30, or anybody can measure those right now. Standard blood tests. Unfortunately, most doctors don't do those tests routinely. You have to spend a little money out of pocket to order some of those extra tests, like C-reactive protein, some other markers of inflammation, some more sophisticated markers of stress on the heart, apart from just cholesterol. But these are all things that you can measure now, which may then, when you see your results, motivate you to take a little bit better care of yourself or someone you love. A lot of listeners are thinking about people that they want to help in their lives, and I'd love to help you do that. If you have somebody that you love, your father, your uncle, your sister, your cousin, somebody that maybe you strongly suspect that could use some help, and maybe they're a little reluctant. Maybe they don't want to. They think they're fine. Everyone thinks they're fine until symptoms start. But maybe they've started to get a couple of symptoms, and you think, maybe this is a good time. Let's see if we can get them to maybe take a couple of steps to improve their health. I'd love an opportunity to help you help that person. And one of the ways that is made possible is just by simply getting them to come in one time. Come into the office, get the workup, get the blood tests. Just, tell them to come check it out. Find out what's happening, what's really happening on the inside with their health right now. They don't have to make any grand decisions. Maybe they're not going to do anything differently at all. Just tell them to get it checked out. It's amazing what you can find out on tests. And then when you see those numbers staring you in the face with your number at the top of that, your name at the top of that report, now something's going on, something that is worth spending a little time investing a little bit in your health now. I'm Dr. Todd Binkley. You're listening to Safe, Effective, Natural Solutions to Almost Any Health Challenge. Today we're talking about how to identify earlier signs of risk for dementia, for cardiovascular disease, which is always associated with that. Common tests that most doctors don't do, but which may motivate you and people you love to take better care of themselves to prevent the risk of this devastating disease called Alzheimer's. So one of the other most important tests that anyone can do, if you can get your doctor to order it, great. If you can't, I can order it for you, and that is the ApoE gene. So the ApoE gene, alpha-lipoprotein E, has several different forms, E2, 3, and 4. You have 2 of each. It's a little bit technical, but the bottom line is if you get that gene test, you can tell whether or not you have 2 2s, 2 3s, 2 4s, or a combination of a 2 and a 3, or a 3 and a 4. The worst is to have a 3 and a 4, or 2 4s, which dramatically increase your risks of dementia. And further, makes your risk of getting severe dementia 25-fold increased risk if you have a head injury, even a mild head injury. So one of the things that I always recommend that people do when they get this ApoE gene test and find out that they have the highest tier risk factors, 3 and 4, is anytime you get even a mild bump on the head, immediately take an Advil or some curcumin, some kind of natural anti-inflammatory, or even if nothing else is available, even take some ibuprofen to immediately blunt that inflammation, because the research has shown that a tiny amount of inflammation to your brain, when you have that gene profile, dramatically, 25-fold increased risk of developing Alzheimer's. Here's another study that just came out, published in May of 2025 in Alzheimer's and Dementia, where researchers did a systematic review of primary studies, genetic studies of neuropsychiatric symptoms, mild cognitive impairment, and or Alzheimer's dementia. And they did genome-wide association studies, GWAS, genome-wide association studies, performed for psychosis and affective symptoms in Alzheimer's dementia with significant associations found for psychosis. So what does that mean? Well, they're not only using this data and broad expanses, collating a number of different studies to just find the risk factors that we've been talking about already on this show, but they're also looking specifically for things that cause an increased risk of some of the most devastating effects. Alzheimer's is very often worse for the caregivers, not for the person who has the dementia so much as the person who has to take care of that person. When you have to take care of your father or your mother or your sister or brother, and they don't even know your name anymore, that's the worst part. But if that's bad enough, even if they don't remember you, but it's so much worse if they're agitated and anxious and have delusions and hallucinations. So this test is showing that this APOE gene, certain variants of it, are strongly associated with increased risk of agitation, anxiety, apathy, where they just don't feel like doing anything, delusions and hallucinations, in mild cognitive impairment, the early form, and full-blown Alzheimer's dementia. So all of these most devastating effects of Alzheimer's are strongly associated with APOE gene status. So last time I checked, that I can get that test for you through LabCorp for $337. And some people, or just don't want to even consider it, but I still recommend it. The 23andMe gene test. Why do I recommend it? Isn't that a little bit scary, given some corporation, your DNA, who knows what they're going to do with it? As of this recording, the company is still in bankruptcy proceedings, but there also is rumor. The website's still up. You can still order the test, and there is mumblings that someone is going to buy it, perhaps even the person that originally developed the technology that they use. So hopefully it will stick around. Hopefully someone will be responsible and maintain the privacy of that data and not just exploit it like everything else, but I don't know. There's so much of that going on right now that we don't even know about, and I'm focused on what's beneficial to people that I see in my practice right now. And for $150, you can get the APOE gene and a dozen other really important gene tests for your health for $149. So if you've got an unlimited budget, you can spend thousands of dollars to get the useful information from those tests. They are available through other labs, but it's just a wealth of information that you can get for $149 from 23andMe, including this APOE gene test. And if it comes back that your APOE gene test status is you have APOE2, variant number 2 of those, or variant 1 number 2 and 1 number 3, then it means that you have lower risk of the worst forms of Alzheimer's. Conversely, if you have two four variants of that gene, then you have the highest probability of developing dementia and having the worst time of it if you do. So that's why I love having people do this test, because that is, when you know that, this is well-established research. When you know that, then you're going to, and you get it as early as possible in your 30s and 40s. Hopefully some people will be listening or tell somebody earlier, because most of the people don't even pay any attention to dementia until they're in their 60s or 70s or 80s. Anyone can get this test now and start doing things, be motivated to do things early to reduce your risk, because none of it is inevitable. The gene doesn't mean that you're definitely going to get these things. It means you're likely to, if you're just a member of the standard population that eats the standard crappy American diet and doesn't exercise that much and has a lot of stress. When you see these studies of populations, remember, that's studies of general population that don't do anything, most of whom don't do anything to take care of their health. So if you know that you have that gene component of those risk factors, then you can motivate yourself and folks that you love to take better care of your health and beat those odds. I'm Dr. Todd Binkley. You're listening to Safe, Effective, Natural Solutions to Almost Any Health Challenge. I had a few more questions after last week's show asking about creatine. Where can I find out more information about creatine? Well, here's a good source, the Mayo Clinic. If you go to the Mayo Clinic and look and just search for creatine, they will tell you that creatine is a compound that comes from 3 amino acids, is found mostly in your body's muscles as well as in the brain, and that most people get creatine from seafood and red meat, though most people get it at levels far below those found in synthetically made creatine supplements. Well, you can get creatine supplements that are not synthetically made, that are extracted from beef, but a lot of people don't like that idea. And this is one of the occasions where synthetically making it's just a combination of amino acids. It's not voodoo science or anything that has any problems associated with it. Synthetically made creatine supplements are vegan. So even if you're worried about eating beef or animal products, you're fine just to get the powdered supplement. The body's liver, pancreas, and kidneys can also make about a gram of creatine per day. And your body stores creatine as phosphocreatine, primarily in muscles where it's used for energy, which is why it's so popular with athletes. People also use oral creatine to treat certain brain disorders, neuromuscular conditions, congestive heart failure, and other conditions. So that's this is what's listed. If you look up creatine on the Mayo Clinic website, good source of general health information. They also remind us that proper hydration is crucial when using creatine supplements to minimize the risk of dehydration and muscle cramps. If you have any other questions about creatine, where to get it, what kind to take, how much to take, what does it do for you, what should you take with it or not with it, or anything that related to that or any other aspect of your health, as always, please email me your questions at Dr. Binkley at BinkleyHealingCenter.com. My website is BinkleyHealingCenter.com. The email is drbinkley at BinkleyHealingCenter.com, which is where you can listen to all of the past episodes of this show, as well as on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. You can also text me. I'll give you my cell phone. Just be aware that my ringer is always off. That's how I'm able to give my cell phone out on air, because I never answer my phone. If you want to talk on the phone, you'll have to leave a message and I'd be happy to call you back. But you can text me anytime. You won't bother me because I'll see the screen light up, and if I'm not busy, I'll answer it right away. That's the fastest way to get a response from me. My cell phone is 805-218-3939. Text me your questions. I'd be happy to answer them. Finally today, there's another great study that came out. This is really, I don't know, maybe it should be surprising. It's actually not that surprising to me, because I test toxins in a lot of people. A lot of people have heard about the effects of toxins. A lot of people have educated themselves to become really concerned about it. And then, most of us think, well, toxins are everywhere. What are you going to do? How do I even know if they're impacting me? Well, how you know is you get tested. You can measure your body's burden of heavy metals like lead, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, and uranium by doing a hair test. This stuff is excreted through your sweat glands and hair follicles. It accumulates in your hair as it grows out, which can be collected and sent into a lab. That's why they use hair for drug testing, similar mechanism. And you can also do a urine test to measure your body burden of heavy metals. They don't show up on blood tests so well. If you have heavy metals showing up in a blood test, then that usually means you've had a really significant or ongoing recent exposure or an ongoing exposure, which is really bad. But lots of people show low or below range tests for those heavy metals on a blood test. And yet when you take those same people and do a hair test or a specific type of urine test, you'll find that these things, because they're stored in fat cells and not circulating in your blood, that people have more than they know about it. And when you find that out, you can do something to release it. So here's a study that was published in JAMA, Journal of the American Medical Association. Living within 1 mile of a golf course was associated with double the odds of developing Parkinson's disease. So we've been talking about Alzheimer's, but Parkinson's disease is another neurodegenerative condition, obviously a completely different disease, but when it comes to the things you can do to prevent neurodegenerative conditions, there's a lot of overlap. So all the things that you can do to reduce your risk of Alzheimer's disease will also tend to reduce your risk of Parkinson's. And that includes avoiding exposure to these toxins. So the odds of living within a mile of a golf course, because of the pesticides and other toxic chemicals they put on the grass to keep that lawn so pretty and clean, living within a mile of a golf course is more than double the odds of developing Parkinson's disease compared with living 6 miles away. So just the difference between 2 miles away and 6 miles away of a golf course doubles your risk of developing Parkinson's disease. This is published by Dr. Brittany Krzyzewski, PhD of the Barrow Neurological Institute in Phoenix, reported in JAMA this past month, May of 2025. There's a study done in Minnesota involving 419 Parkinson cases and over 5,000 controls, median age 72. And this was done over several years, from 1991 to 2015. They collected data from 139 golf courses and 224 water services areas. So the odds of getting Parkinson's disease decreased by 9% for every mile increase in the distance from a golf course up to 18 miles. Wow, that's pretty eye-opening. I got so entranced with it that I didn't just realize we're about out of time. So do something this week to be healthier than you were last week. Have a wonderful weekend.
You've been listening to Safe, Effective Natural Solutions with Dr. Todd Binkley. If you have a health question you want discussed on the show, email your health questions to Dr. Binkley at BinkleyHealingCenter.com. Take advantage of this opportunity to ask questions for yourself and for your loved ones, because our health matters. Join him next Friday at 2 p.m. for safe, effective natural solutions here on 98.3 FM, The Word.